There's a hill somewhere in the folds of southeastern Anatolia, a quiet, wind-kissed mound that rises gently from the earth like the slow exhale of an ancient breath. Its name is Göbekli. In Turkish, it means potbelly hill, but that name, soft and rounded, barely hints at what slumbers beneath. And tonight, we will walk there together, not with our feet, but with our thoughts. Not through time, but through dream. Breathe slowly now. Let the weight of the day soften. Let your mind settle like dust on the surface of stone. Because this is not a story of facts. It is a memory. Not yours, not mine, but of the earth itself. Some say that stones do not speak, that they are mute things, dead things, locked in stillness. But others believe that some stones, the very oldest ones, hold memory like a second skin. That they remember hands that carved them, eyes that watched them rise, prayers whispered in lost tongues. Göbekli is made of such stones. They do not shout, they do not sing, they do not move, and yet they speak. Perhaps not in words, perhaps not in ways our modern minds can easily grasp, but in symbols, in weight, in placement, in silence so deep it echoes. They waited beneath the dust for 12,000 years, long before the pyramids dreamed of the sky, long before Stonehenge greeted the solstice, before cities, before writing, before memory became history. Imagine that for a moment. Imagine a time when the world was younger than myth, when the stars were closer, the seasons wilder, and the line between spirit and stone blurred. When humans, nomadic, hungry, tender, paused not to survive, but to remember. And what did they build? A temple, or something like it. A place where stones stood in deliberate circles, as if gathered to speak. Each pillar rising like a sentinel from the earth, carved in a shape we now call T-shaped, though we don't know what it meant. No faces, no mouths, no eyes, just arms gently folded over the front, as if in stillness, as if in reverence, as if waiting. And what were they waiting for? The archaeologists unearthed them slowly, with brushes, with trembling hands, with the creeping awe of those who realize that history is not a straight line, but a spiral. Among the stones, there are carvings, foxes, serpents, cranes, boars, etched with a skill too old to trace, too intimate to dismiss. Who carved them? No one knows. Why here? No one knows. But when the wind touches your ear, when the moon rises just right, you might hear the murmur, not with sound, but with presence. Perhaps they're the first memory, not of a person, not even of a people, but of consciousness itself. When the world opened its eyes for the first time and realized it could dream. So rest now, because this is not just a story. It's a return to a place older than belief, a place where the stones once knew how to speak. And if we're quiet enough, if we listen with our bones instead of our ears, we might remember what they once said. They call this land the cradle of civilization, a soft and fertile region where wheat was first coaxed from the soil, where animals were first gentled by human hands, and where the wild pulse of nature first began to sync with the rhythm of the hearth. The ancients knew this place well. The rivers whispered to them, the Euphrates, the Tigris, two silver threads weaving their way through the skin of Mesopotamia, nurturing dreams older than gods. And in this corner of the world, on a hill once thought ordinary, something ancient slumbered beneath layers of time, layers of silence, layers of forgetting. Göbekli lay buried for 12,000 years. Not by accident, but by intent. It was buried on purpose, stone by stone, enclosure by enclosure. The builders of this site, whoever they were, covered their creation with dust and debris, almost as if to preserve it, or perhaps to protect it. From time, from the world, from us. You see, we tend to think of archaeology as digging through dirt. But here, we dig through memory, through layers of human longing, through what we are willing to remember and what we choose to forget. Some believe this hill was once called Eden. Not a name, perhaps, but in essence, a sacred place between heaven and earth, between wildness and order, between man and a mystery. And the dust that settled on it was not just dust. It was a veil, a curtain drawn across the first act of the human story. Imagine it. Thousands of years ago, in a world unrecognizable to us, a people rose before dawn. They didn't write. They didn't farm. They hunted. They wandered. And yet, they came together to build something that endures beyond all explanation. Not a shelter, not a dwelling, but a monument. A circle of stone, not for survival, but for meaning. What did they believe? Did they think the stars were spirits? Did they see the animals as kin? Did they build to honor? To mourn? To remember? We don't know. But beneath the dust of this hill lies a truth so quiet, so sacred, that it took millennia for the earth to finally exhale and let it rise. Klaus Schmidt, the German archaeologist who unearthed Göbekli Tepe in the 1990s, said that when he first saw the stones peeking through the field, he felt as if the ground had opened its eye and looked back at him. He knew something waited beneath. And when they began to dig, softly, reverently, what they found was impossible. A site so ancient, it shattered the timeline of human development. So complex, it defied the idea that hunter-gatherers could not build temples. So deliberate, it challenged everything we thought we knew about the story of civilization. Because this Göbekli Tepe was not supposed to exist. It stands in that eerie space between myth and matter, where stories once told by firelight become shadows carved in stone. And as we lie here tonight, listening to the breath of the wind across Anatolian fields, we might ask ourselves, what else lies beneath the dust of Eden? What other truths wait silently, wrapped in time, waiting for someone, some shepherd, some dreamer, to disturb the soil and remember? There's a silence here that is not empty. It's full of meanings we once knew, before we forgot how to listen. So close your eyes now, and let the weight of the dust settle around you, gently, like sleep. Because beneath it, there are stories. And beneath the stories, there's us. It didn't begin with a scholar, or a king, or a historian with a grand theory. It began with a shepherd, a man walking the same paths his ancestors had walked for countless generations, perhaps chasing a stray goat, perhaps simply wandering. They say he stumbled, or maybe he paused to rest. Maybe the light of the afternoon sun struck something in the grass, something too smooth to be natural, too sharp-edged to be stone. Just the tip of a carving. A shape he didn't recognize, but somehow couldn't ignore. It was just a stone, he thought, but the stone did not belong. Years later, Klaus Schmidt would call that moment a turning point in the story of the human race. But for the shepherd, it was only a curiosity, a whisper in the field, a wrinkle in the fabric of the ordinary. He didn't know that the rock he kicked with his boot was the crown of a T-shaped pillar buried beneath millennia of earth and time. He didn't know that he had disturbed the sleep of one of the oldest ceremonial sites ever built by human hands. Some call it fate, others call it accident, but perhaps it was invitation, because sometimes history hides itself until it is ready to be seen, and sometimes it reveals itself not to those who seek, but to those who simply wander. A mistake, they say, but what is a mistake in the eyes of time? When Klaus Schmidt arrived in 1994, the site had already been dismissed by others. Just a bunch of broken gravestones, they said. Random rocks, nothing of importance. But Klaus, He looked deeper. He listened to the ground. He felt that pulse, the thrum of intentionality beneath his feet. He crouched in the heat, running his fingers across the stones, and said words that would echo across the world. This is not a field of graves. This is something else. And so the digging began, not with violence, not with haste, but with awe. They brushed away centuries of silence, layer by layer, carefully, respectfully, and what rose from the hill was a truth no one expected. Stone pillars, arranged in perfect circles, each weighing tons, each carved with animals, abstract symbols, and hands folded across the body. And beneath them, no bones, no burials, no signs of dwelling, only presence, only meaning, only a quiet demand to be remembered. But remember this, none of it would have happened had the shepherd not wandered, had he not misstepped, had he not been curious about a rock that didn't look like the others. So often we think history is shaped by great events, by kings, by wars, by inventions written in books. But sometimes history turns on the heel of a boot in the grass, on a glance, a whisper, a single pause under a wide and ancient sky. Perhaps that is the lesson of Göbekli Tepe, that everything meaningful begins with attention, with seeing what others ignore, with listening to the things that don't make noise. And as you drift deeper now, into this evening, into this breath, let yourself feel it, that maybe you, too, have stumbled across something ancient, something sleeping just beneath the surface of your life, a stone you almost stepped over. That turns out to be a doorway, because what the shepherd found that day was not just a stone. It was a memory, and in finding it, he changed what we thought we knew about who we are. There are moments in the human story when everything changes, but they do not always come with trumpets or wars or proclamations written in stone. Sometimes they come quietly, on a summer afternoon, on a hill no one thought to name, in a trench carved more by curiosity than ambition. In 1995, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt stood ankle-deep in the earth of Göbekli Tepe, and with a sweep of his brush, time moved. Not forward, not backward, but sideways, because what he found didn't just alter a date or correct a textbook. It fractured the story of human civilization itself and invited us to rewrite it from the very beginning. Klaus wasn't like other archaeologists. He didn't chase treasure. He didn't seek glory. He was a man of stillness, of long silences and careful observation. He had studied prehistoric sites for decades, wandered ruins where memory had turned to dust, and asked questions the world had long stopped asking. But something about Göbekli Tepe spoke to him. Not loudly, not clearly, but deeply. When others dismissed the stone fragments as the remains of medieval graves, he sensed otherwise. He said later, "I knew within minutes this was the place I had been looking for." And so he stayed, and he dug, slowly, tenderly, as one uncovers not just an artifact, but a revelation. The soil began to yield secrets that didn't belong to any known chapter of history. Massive T-shaped pillars arranged in concentric circles, some towering over 16 feet high, each carved with strange, deliberate symbols. Foxes in motion, cranes in flight, scorpions poised to strike. Not random, not decorative, intentional, sacred. There were no signs of domestic life. No hearths, no houses, no trash pits or graves, no pottery to speak of, just monumental architecture built by people we thought had no business building monuments. Because these people were hunter-gatherers. They lived without cities, without writing, without the wheel. They followed herds and forged roots. Or so we thought. Göbekli Tepe turned that story inside out. Before, we believed that agriculture came first, that people settled, planted, domesticated, and only then did they develop religion, temples, and ceremony. But this hill said otherwise. This hill whispered, "We gathered to worship, and from worship we learned to stay." A temple, not as a byproduct of civilization, but its cradle. The dig at Göbekli Tepe revealed not just a site, but a truth long buried beneath the assumptions of progress. That perhaps the need to find meaning, the need to gather, to pray, to connect with something greater than ourselves, came before the plow, before the city, before the book. Can you imagine it? 1,000 generations ago, beneath a sky untouched by light pollution or noise, men and women came together, not to hunt or fight, but to build circles of stone carved with myth and memory, open to the stars. They labored not for survival, but for sacredness. And here's what's most haunting. They buried it. When they were done, they covered it with earth. Carefully, methodically, as if performing a ritual, as if sealing a secret they knew was not meant for their time alone. Archaeologists still don't know why, but perhaps they knew that truth has seasons, that some truths must sleep until the world is ready to understand them again. And so it was. Göbekli Tepe slept beneath the soil for over 12,000 years, while empires rose and fell, while prophets spoke and were silenced, while maps were drawn and redrawn. And then, one man with a brush and a whispering heart uncovered it, and time blinked, because this wasn't just a discovery. It was a reminder that the past is not behind us. It is beneath us. And when we dig into it, not just with shovels, but with wonder, we find pieces of ourselves that we didn't know were missing. Tonight, as you listen, as your breath softens and the quiet deepens, think of that a single site buried in the belly of a hill could turn our understanding of humanity on its head. That a man with dust on his hands and stars in his eyes could hold up a broken stone and say, "Everything we thought we knew begins again." So sleep now, not away from the past, but toward it, toward a memory that waited 12,000 years for someone to hear it. And perhaps tonight, that someone is you. Close your eyes for a moment and picture a village, not a modern one with brick and wires and fences, but a Neolithic gathering place, a circle of tents perhaps, or huts of mud and thatch, a fire flickering in the center, the smell of meat, voices of children, tools made of flint, discarded bones, footsteps etched into soft soil. That is what we expect when we speak of ancient people, a village, a place of life, a story of survival. But at Göbekli Tepe, there's none of that. No homes, no burials, no cooking pits, no trash, no farming tools, no signs that anyone ever lived there. And yet they built temples, massive stone-ringed sanctuaries, or at least we call them that, temples, because there's no better word for what we've found. But even temple feels too small, too modern, too tidy. What was this place? Why would people with no fixed address, no town, no walls, gather to build with such precision, such care, such reverence? The truth is, we do not know. And that unknowing is beautiful. It opens a space in imagination that history rarely allows. It invites us to feel, not just to understand, to step into the shoes, bare, calloused, of those who walked here 12,000 years ago, and ask, why do they come? Some believe Göbekli Tepe was a meeting place for seasonal gatherings, that nomadic tribes converge here once or twice a year, like rivers feeding into a sacred pool. They brought no livestock. They left no permanent structures, only devotion carved in limestone. Others think it was a pilgrimage site, a place not of home, but of yearning, a kind of threshold between the everyday and the eternal. And maybe That's why there are no bones. Because this place was never meant to host the living. It was meant to host the sacred. Some scholars have proposed it was a site for funeral rites, even without graves. A place to release the spirit, to honor the journey from flesh to ether. They point to the stone enclosures, circular, protective, enclosing nothing, like wombs or tombs. But the absence of remains here speaks louder than presence. It suggests not ignorance, but intention. As if the builders of Göbekli Tepe wanted to create a space not contaminated by death or clutter, by routine or survival. A space apart, a space beyond, a place where the veil was thin, where the animals etched into stone weren't symbols of food or danger, but of transcendence. A fox leaping in silence, a vulture with outstretched wings, a scorpion carved in full relief, tail curled as if ready to strike the soul itself. Some of the pillars face inward, as if in council. Others face out like guardians. And in the very center of each circle, two taller stones stand side by side, like sentinels or lovers, or perhaps representations of the very first humans. Who stood between them? What words were spoken in that space? What songs, now lost, once echoed off these stones? The absence of domestic life at Göbekli Tepe forces us to rethink the very arc of civilization. Because if they were not living here, then they were building something for reasons other than survival. And that, in itself, is revolutionary. It suggests that our species was driven, long before cities or kings, by something else, by meaning, by connection, by a need to stand under the stars and say, we were here, we felt, we believed, not because they had to, but because something within them called for it. And that calling, soft as breath, old as fire, echoes in us still. Because even now, we gather, we build, we seek places where the noise quiets, and something older than language speaks to us. So tonight, as you rest, know this. You are not alone in your longing. 12,000 years ago, others felt it too. And in their hands, that longing became stone. It became memory. And though they left behind no homes, no bones, no names, they left a place, a sacred hill, where the only thing present is presence itself. And in that stillness, perhaps they are waiting for us to return. The earth remembers in circles. Rain falls in cycles. The moon waxes and wanes. The seasons loop back on themselves like old melodies rediscovered. And at Göbekli Tepe, buried beneath centuries of forgetfulness, lie circles so precise, so deliberate, that they seem less built and more summoned. These are not random arrangements of stone. They are sacred enclosures, ritual arenas perhaps, each one carved with effort, intention, and what can only be called devotion. You see, the hill is not just a single site. It is many rings within the same breath. Over 20 circular enclosures have been found so far, some still sleeping beneath the soil, untouched, unseen. Only a handful have been fully excavated, and each one reveals a new layer of awe. They're not all the same size. Some are wide, open, generous. Others are more intimate, almost secretive, but they share a language. At the center of each circle, two colossal T-shaped pillars rise, always taller than the others, always facing one another, like silent twins holding vigil over time. These central stones may represent the human form. Long bodies, slender arms folded across the front, no faces, no eyes, and yet a presence. Surrounding them, a ring of smaller pillars stand like witnesses, all T-shaped, all positioned with care. Some are embedded into low stone walls. Others lean slightly, softened by time. Each circle is oriented differently. Some align with celestial points, perhaps stars, perhaps solstices. But nothing is random. The placement speaks. In the silence of these rings, there is design, not just structure, meaning not just form. It's as if each circle was a sentence, written not in words, but in weight and shadow. Imagine standing at the center of one. The ground beneath your feet is smooth, swept clean by generations. The air is still, except for the occasional breath of wind whispering through the stone. Around you, the pillars rise, not towering but watchful. And those two central monoliths seem to lean just slightly toward each other, like they are confiding or grieving or remembering. The circles may have served as ceremonial chambers. Some have benches carved into the walls, as if for elders or initiates. Others contain niches that may have held offerings or relics or stories carved in objects now lost. But no idols, no gods with names, no inscriptions to explain, only symbols, only silence. And yet, these circles speak to the body, to the heart. They evoke the kind of memory that doesn't live in a mind, but in the bones. One of the most striking things about Göbekli Tepe's enclosures is how timeless they feel. Despite their age, 12,000 years, perhaps older, they do not feel primitive. They feel primordial. There's a difference. Primitive implies something incomplete. But primordial is before all things. It is the origin, the breath before the word. The builders of these circles may have had no cities, no written language, no metal tools. But they had geometry. They had vision. They had an intimate relationship with space, weight, balance. To build such enclosures required organization, cooperation, and belief. Not just in stone, but in what stone could hold. Because these circles were not just made of limestone. They were made of meaning. The choice to carve them so deeply into the earth suggests more than utility. It suggests immersion. To enter the circle was to descend. To leave the world above and step into something older than sky, deeper than speech. A ritual act, a rebirth, a return. Some believe the layout of the circles mirrored constellations, that they encoded the stars in the ground. As above, so below. Others think they represent the cycle of death and rebirth, the eternal return, the shape of spirit as it moves through time. But no theory captures the fullness of what it feels like to simply imagine them, to walk through them in your mind, to feel their gravity, not just physical, but emotional, because circles don't just enclose. They gather, they draw in, they invite, they bind. And maybe, in building them, our ancestors were trying to gather themselves, to hold their lives, their memories, their fears and hopes in a shape that made sense. The circle, the eternal, the place without beginning or end. So let your thoughts now move gently in a spiral. Breathe in and out, and picture those rings of stone still standing after 12 millennia of rain, wind, silence. They are not broken. They are not forgotten. They are waiting. And perhaps in dreaming of them, we come full circle too. There are places in the world where time feels still, but there are rarer places where time feels watched. At Göbekli Tepe, the T-shaped pillars do not just stand. They observe, and under moonlight, they take on an entirely different presence. Not as ruins, but as giants. They rise from the earth with an unnatural stillness, each one cut from pale limestone, their surface worn by wind, but not by meaning. Even now, 12,000 years later, they bear themselves like beings. Not statues, not stones, but sentinels. Their shape is simple, but unmistakable. A vertical trunk and a horizontal cap. The letter T, yes. But to those who stand among them, it feels less like a letter and more like a gesture, a posture, a presence. Some say they are stylized representations of the human form. And once you notice it, it's impossible to unsee. The vertical slab becomes a torso. Arms are etched along the sides, folded gently across the belly, hands touching, as if in calm, as if in prayer. They are not aggressive. They are not proud. They are composed, almost mournful. There are no faces, no eyes, no mouths, but they still seem to speak. And at night, when the moon drapes the hill in silver, they glow. The shadows fall deep into their engravings. Foxes slink along their sides. Birds take flight from their bellies. A scorpion curls along the base of one, its stinger forever poised in stone. And through all this, the T-shapes stand quiet, still. There's something profoundly moving in their restraint. These are not loud gods, not triumphant warriors. They do not brandish weapons or ride chariots of myth. They stand. That is all. And somehow, that is enough. They do not need eyes to see. They see through presence. They do not need voices to command. They speak in silence. There is a theory, softly whispered among those who study sacred geometry and ancient myth, that these pillars were not just markers of ritual. They were mirrors. Mirrors of the human spirit at a time when the line between human and divine was not yet drawn. Perhaps the builders didn't worship these giants. Perhaps they became them. Perhaps the ritual was not about pleasing gods in the sky, but about embodying something higher here on earth. To stand in that sacred space between the twin monoliths and feel yourself dissolve into stone, into memory, into eternity. After all, we must remember, these people had no writing, no history to read, no scrolls to pass down. What they knew, they carved. What they felt, they raised. And what they worshipped, if they did, may not have been a god above, but a presence within. And so they built these giants, not monstrous, not grotesque, but quiet, patient, aware. The longer you look at them, the more you begin to feel watched back. Not judged, not feared, but acknowledged. As if the pillars are not relics, but participants. Not memories, but minds. Some say the twin central pillars in each circle represent a duality. Not good and evil, but self and spirit. Life and afterlife. Form and formlessness. To walk between them may have been an act of transformation, a passage, a crossing of the soul's invisible threshold. And if that is true, then these T-shaped giants are not ruins. They are guardians of transition, gateways, witnesses, silent chaplains of an ancient human yearning to understand the unseen, to honor the mystery, to belong to something larger than life. So tonight, as you drift between thought and sleep, picture the moon, full and patient, rising over that lonely Anatolian hill. Let wash over the stones, soft as memory. Let its silver light stretch across carvings no one alive can read. Let it reveal the quiet posture of the giants, standing, watching, enduring. And as you breathe deeper now, let your body grow still like theirs. Let your thoughts quiet. Let the edges blur. And know that somewhere, on that ancient hill, the pillars still stand. And they are not forgotten. Because tonight in this breath, you remember them. When words had not yet been invented. When stories were passed not through ink, but through gesture and gaze. What do we leave behind? Not scrolls. Not scriptures, but animals, etched in stone, etched in memory. At Göbekli Tepe, animals are everywhere. Foxes, serpents, boars, vultures, cranes, wild ducks, scorpions. Not drawn in haste or decoration, but carved with care, with depth, with knowing. It's easy to walk among ancient stones and forget to look closely, to assume these creatures were symbols of the hunt, or talismans of survival. But these are no trophies. They were chosen, and the stone remembers. Take the serpent, for example. It coils along several pillars, always smooth, always deliberate. Sometimes it winds around the edges like a whisper. Sometimes it strikes, mid-motion, frozen in limestone. In many ancient cultures, the snake is a threshold creature, one that slithers between worlds, beneath the earth, above the ground. A creature of transformation, a symbol of death and rebirth. It sheds its skin, it renews itself, and perhaps here, on this hill of circles and silence, the serpent was not feared but revered, not an enemy but a guide. Then there is the fox. It appears more than any other animal on the pillars of Göbekli Tepe. Sleek, cunning, agile. What was it to them? To us, the fox is often a trickster, a creature that moves between darkness and daylight, that disappears before it is seen. But maybe to them, the fox was the soul's companion, the one who leads you through the underworld, between the twin pillars of life and afterlife. One pillar even shows a fox walking upright, almost human, as if crossing a boundary between forms. They may have believed in shape-shifting, or in the idea that human and animal were not separate, but braided together, each one reflecting the other. And what of the scorpion? Sharp, still, etched near the bottom of a pillar, where the eye must travel downward to meet it. In Mesopotamian myth, scorpions guard the gates of the sun god. They are sentinels of the threshold, dwellers at the edge of dawn and death. And perhaps that is why the builders carved them, not to frighten, but to warn, to mark the crossing, to say, here, you enter something sacred. Step lightly. There are birds too, cranes with long, graceful necks, ducks mid-flight, vultures with outstretched wings, sometimes holding headless forms. Yes, you heard that right, headless human figures beneath their talons. A strange image, but in some Neolithic cultures, sky burial was a ritual of release. The dead were offered to the birds, to the sky, to feed the eternal. And maybe these birds were not seen as scavengers, but as messengers, carriers of the soul, bringers of return. Each animal on these stones feels less like a decoration, and more like a word in a forgotten language. They are glyphs, alive not with grammar, but with feeling. Symbols that speak to something older than understanding, to something we feel in the belly, in the spine, in the breath. Because long before humans had alphabets, we had animals, and they spoke to us, through dream, through hunt, through ritual. They were not lesser, they were not other, they were part of us. And perhaps at Göbekli Tepe, the walls were not meant to be read, but remembered, not with the mind, but with the ancient part of us that still feels all when we meet the eyes of a wild creature. Even now, when we see a fox pause in the dusk, or hear a serpent rustle through dry leaves, something stirs, a recognition, an echo, a whisper from a time when we carved their images in stone, not to own them, but to honor them. So tonight, as your thoughts begin to quiet, as the edges of sleep approach, imagine those animals in moonlight, foxes slipping between the pillars, birds circling overhead, the soft hiss of a serpent beneath the stone. They are still there, still watching, still waiting, not frozen, not lost, but alive in the memory of the hill, and perhaps in the stillness of your own body. You carry their shape too. What is language? Is it only sound, shaped by breath and tongue? Is it ink pressed onto parchment? Or could it be something older, something felt, not spoken? On the wind-brushed hill of Göbekli Tepe, there is a language. It is not alphabet. It is not syllable. It is not heard. And yet, it speaks. It speaks in stone. And it speaks in silence. Walk among the T-shaped pillars, and you feel it. Not a message in a modern sense, not a sentence to decode, but a presence that draws you inward, as if each enclosure is a single thought, each carving a memory, each space between pillars a pause like a breath held for thousands of years. This is not communication. It is communion, a connection across time, across mortality, across language itself. You do not need to understand the carvings to feel their weight. A boar charging forward, a vulture with its wings stretched wide, a headless man below, not in pain, but in transition. What were they saying? Perhaps it was not meant to be understood, but experienced. Some scholars call it proto-writing, the beginning of symbolic thought, an early language that wasn't trying to name things, but to invite meaning. Each image carved into the stone could represent many things. The fox might be a clan symbol, or a spirit guide, or a soul returning in another form. There are no captions, no guides, only intuition. This ambiguity is not confusion. It is the very essence of myth, because myth does not explain. It evokes. It lives in metaphor, in layers, in shifting truths. And the stones of Göbekli Tepe are soaked in that kind of truth, the kind that doesn't narrow, but expands. Consider the layout. Each circle with two tall pillars at its center, surrounded by others in careful formation. Some believe they were arranged to represent stars, that the entire site is a map of the heavens, rendered in stone, a sky drawn downward, a conversation between cosmos and clay. Others say the pillars are storytellers, that to walk among them was to move through a ritual narrative, birth, death, becoming. But here is the beauty of Göbekli Tepe. It refuses to be translated. It is not a puzzle to solve. It is a mystery to dwell in, a sacred silence that contains more truth than any word. You see, silence is not emptiness. It is a vessel, a space where meaning is allowed to echo, to unfold, to breathe. In our modern world, where language is constant, where we scroll and speak and write endlessly, it is easy to forget the wisdom of silence. But on this hill, where no voice has been heard in millennia, the stones still communicate, not through volume, but through presence. They say that when Klaus Schmidt first stood among them, he didn't feel triumphant. He felt humbled, as if the site was not there to be discovered, but to be remembered, as if he wasn't unearthing history, but being invited into a dream. Perhaps that is what this language is. A dream cast in stone. A myth the earth tells itself again and again. And if we are quiet enough, still enough, we can enter that dream too. Because somewhere within you, beneath your names and titles and thoughts, there's a place that still understands silence. A place that knows how to read without reading, to hear without sound, to understand without understanding. So let the words fall away now. Let the mind loosen its grip. Let the silence rise like mist around you. You're not lost. You are listening. You are remembering. And Göbekli Tepe is speaking. Night must have fallen differently back then. There were no city lights, no electric hum in the distance, no restless highways stretching into the dark. Only the vast Anatolian sky, wide, eternal, full of breathless stars. And in the middle of that ancient silence, on the crest of a sacred hill, there must have been fire. We cannot know for certain. No charred remains, no definitive hearths have been found. But fire is older than farming, older than writing. Fire is our first ritual. So close your eyes and imagine it with me now. The circles of Göbekli Tepe, not as ruins but alive. Stone pillars rising like ghostly trees from the earth, enclosing a space that was neither home nor tomb, but something in between. And in the center, fire, a small flame at first, then many, a ring of flickering light dancing across carved foxes and cranes. making the serpent's body shimmer as if alive. This wasn't a fire for cooking. This was not about warmth. This fire was ceremony, the kind of fire that marks thresholds, beginnings, endings, becomings. We do not know what rites were performed here. We can only guess, carefully, respectfully, by tracing the whispers left in stone. Some pillars hold carved hands clasped gently over the body. Others show animals mid-motion, as if part of a procession. Were they dancing? Was there music? We have no drums, no flutes, no lyrics, but surely there was rhythm. A heartbeat, a cadence in the stepping of bare feet on packed earth. The rustle of feathers, the rattle of bone. Perhaps they sang in tones that imitated the wind. Perhaps they mimicked the calls of animals, or spoke in a language so old it had no vowels, only breath. What did they offer to the flame? Grains? Milk? A feather from a sacred bird? A piece of themselves? Hair? Blood? A word spoken into smoke? Some believe Göbekli Tepe was a site for death rituals, but not of mourning, not sadness, more likely transformation. It is possible that the people who built these enclosures believed death was not an end, but a doorway, and fire was the key, not a destroyer, but a messenger, a bright serpent rising from the earth to carry offerings to the sky, a flame that burned not for destruction, but for remembrance. Think of the architecture. Deep, circular pits carved into the bedrock, each with tall twin pillars at the center. Does it not feel like a womb? Or a cauldron? A crucible of the soul? What happened in the center may have been deeply private, a kind of initiation, a farewell, a vow. The participants may have approached the space in silence, walking between the outer pillars, wrapped in animal skins or sacred markings. They may have stood between the tall, twin monoliths, bathed in firelight, shadows dancing across their faces, and spoken a name, or a prayer, or nothing at all. The fire would flicker, the wind would shift, and the stars above, those same stars we see tonight, would listen. Because stars do listen. They remember every ritual ever performed beneath them. And perhaps that's why Göbekli Tepe feels so familiar. Even though it is older than writing, older than myth, it is a place shaped by ritual instinct, that ancient pull to mark what cannot be explained. Birth, death, love, longing. We light fires to bear witness. Even now, in modern cities, we still gather around small circles of flame, candles, hearths, torches. We make wishes. We remember. We hope. The people of Göbekli Tepe were no different. Their rituals may be lost, but the need behind them remains. To create meaning, to honor the unseen, to transform presence into memory. So as you lie here, wrapped in quiet, let the image of the fire burn softly behind your eyes. Let it glow in the center of that stone circle. Let it flicker across the ancient carvings. Let it warm your breath. And know that, in some way, you are part of that ritual too. Because remembering is a sacred act. And when we remember what once was, we bring its light back into the world. Even if just for a moment. Even if just in a dream. There's a sound that follows you at Göbekli Tepe. But it is not the sound of footsteps. Not the call of birds. Not the clang of tools or the laughter of children. It is the sound of what is missing. A sound that is not heard, but felt. A kind of pressure. A hush with weight. An echo that has no source. The longer you stay among the pillars, the more you begin to notice it. Not what is here, but what is not. No bones. No bodies. No ashes. No writing. No instructions. No names. No burials beneath the enclosures. No chambers lined with offerings. Not even the simplest sign of life. No hearths. No refuse. No pottery shards pressed into the earth by repetition. It is as if they came here and then erased themselves. As if this place was built not to hold memory, but to release it. Some ancient sites are loud with their histories. They carry layers of evidence: coins, tools, teeth, broken jars, and burned wood. You can read them like books. But Göbekli Tepe offers you a blank page. A page that has been touched deeply, but never written on. And that blankness is not an accident. It is a gesture, deliberate, devotional, like a room prepared for prayer, swept clean of all distraction, like a silence shared between two people who need no words. In that silence lies mystery, and in that mystery lies invitation, because what we call absence is never truly empty. It is a space that holds the unspoken, the unrecorded, the sacred. What if they chose not to write? Not because they couldn't, but because what they were witnessing was too large for language? What if this site was a conversation not with each other, but with the invisible? Consider this: a circle of stone cut deep into the earth. Two tall pillars at its center, flanked by silent companions. No idol, no altar, no relic, only open air, only space. But what is space if not a vessel? If not a stage for transformation? Some believe that the very emptiness of Göbekli Tepe is the point. That in removing all traces of the self, the builders made room for something other, something vast, something not born of the body, but of the soul. This is not absence in the way we often fear it. This is sacred absence, the kind monks seek in the desert, the kind poets listen for between lines, the kind we brush against in dreams when the world grows quiet enough to hear the deeper music beneath it. And that music is made of space, of pause, of what has been left unsaid. Even now, we feel it, that strange sense that Göbekli Tepe is complete, not in spite of what is missing, but because of it, like a song composed entirely in rests, like a sculpture made from what is not carved. And so we listen as one might listen at the edge of the sea, not for words, but for waveforms, for a rhythm too wide to measure, too slow to sing. Some call this emptiness, but it is anything but empty. It is invitation, to feel, to remember, to wonder, to fill in the gaps not with facts, but with reverence. Because the builders of Göbekli Tepe have not truly vanished. They're still here, not in artifacts, but in architecture, not in noise, but in stillness. And as you lie there now, eyes closed, breath soft, you too are part of that stillness, part of that sacred pause. And perhaps, as your thoughts begin to dissolve into sleep, you might hear it, the sound of absence, and within it, the faintest whisper of presence. We're used to digging up the past. We imagine time as a sediment, layers upon layers, each holding the artifacts of what was left behind. Tools, bones, ashes, coins, the wreckage of history, the dust of life. But what if something was buried not by time, but on purpose? Not lost, but hidden? Not abandoned, but honored? That is the question Göbekli Tepe poses to us in its quiet, deliberate way. Because somewhere near the end of its use, perhaps 1,000 years after its creation, they buried it. They covered the sacred enclosures, stone circles so painstakingly carved, with dirt, rubble, and layers of compacted debris. Not in haste, not in violence, but with care. They filled in the spaces between the pillars. They smoothed over the circles. They sealed the mouths of the giants. They erased their own sacred space. And to this day, we do not know why. No invasion, no fire, no signs of collapse. It was not destroyed. It was not ruined. It was put to sleep. Some archaeologists believe it was an act of transition, that the people who buried Göbekli Tepe had moved on, not geographically but spiritually. That new beliefs, new myths, new gods had taken the place of what once stood at the center of their world. Others suggest it was a gesture of protection, that the builders sensed something was coming: flood, famine, conquest, and chose to shield the sacred, not with swords, but with soil. There's a quiet grief in that idea, isn't there? Imagine the final ceremony, the last firelight flickering across the carvings. The priests, or whatever they called themselves, gathered in a silence so profound it felt like prayer. And then they began to fill the circle, stone by stone, layer by layer, not to destroy it, no, but to lay it to rest. A burial not of death, but of meaning. You see, we think of sacred spaces as permanent. Cathedrals, temples, mosques, they are built to endure. But maybe permanence was never the goal. Maybe what mattered most was the ritual of letting go. Because sometimes love does not mean clinging. Sometimes reverence does not mean preservation. Sometimes the most sacred act is not to build, but to bury, to return the sacred to the earth from which it came. The people of Göbekli Tepe may have believed that sacred power has seasons, that what begins in light must return to shadow, that holiness, like a flame, burns brightest just before it is extinguished. And so they buried the first temple, not in sorrow, but in completion. And there it lay for 12,000 years, forgotten by time, cradled by earth, until one day a shepherd stumbled across a strange stone, and the breath of the past rose again. But what if the burial was part of the message? What if the silence was part of the story? What if the builders of Göbekli Tepe wanted us, not just to uncover it, but to wonder why it was ever covered at all? That mystery is an offering, a whisper across time, a question left hanging in the stillness. Would you have buried your sacred too? And tonight, as you lie still, your body soft against the sheets, perhaps you can feel the echo of that gesture in your own life. What you buried? What sacred pieces of yourself have you laid to rest, not out of fear, but out of reverence? What truths do you carry not on the surface, but beneath, in layers of silence and time? You're not a ruin. You are a site of memory, of ritual, of sacred forgetting. And perhaps, like Göbekli Tepe, someday, when the moment is right, the dust will shift, and what you buried will rise again. Not as it was, but as it was always meant to be seen. There is a wind that touches the stones of Göbekli Tepe. It comes not with force, but with patience. It does not howl. It does not scream. It reminds. They say it rises from the north, dry, crisp, laced with the scent of distant snow. It moves low across the Anatolian plateau, carrying with it dust, seed, silence, and stories. The same wind that rustles wheat fields today once brushed against the arms of the men and women who raised those pillars. It tugged at their furs. It curled around their fingers as they carved animal into stone. It filled their lungs. And when they breathed it out again, perhaps they sang into it, or prayed, or simply listened, because wind has always been more than weather. In ancient myths, it was breath. The first breath, the spirit moving over the face of the deep. In Sumerian epics, the wind carried the voice of the gods. In Egyptian legend, it brought the sun god's boat across the sky. In the Old Testament, it was Ruach, the divine breath, stirring life from clay. And on this wind-swept hill, where pillars rise like ribs from the earth, the breath of the northern wind might have been the first messenger. Imagine this. The builders of Göbekli Tepe standing beneath the open sky, their work complete. No roof above them, only stars, only wind. They did not inscribe their names. They did not build walls. They opened a circle. They left it bare, exposed to wind, tonight to eternity, because maybe they believed that the wind would carry what they could not hold. Their rituals, their fears, their intentions. The wind would remember, even if no one else did. You see, Göbekli Tepe was never a closed chamber. It was always open to the elements, to sun, rain, starlight, to the passage of clouds and the gaze of the moon, and always, always to the wind. Wind doesn't leave artifacts. It leaves impressions, a smoothing of the stone, a curve in the dust, a soft erosion of time. And yet, in its own way, it preserves. Because when everything else is lost, language, bloodline, song, the wind still moves through the same valleys, still crosses the same ridge, still remembers. Some believe that wind is a kind of memory with wings, that it collects breath from all those who've walked before us and redistributes it patiently, endlessly. It may be why temples were built in such high, open places, not just to rise closer to heaven, but to catch the wind, to let it move through stone like breath through a flute, to let it sing. And maybe that's what Göbekli Tepe was, a breath made solid, a place to gather air and memory and shape them into permanence. Even now, if you stand on that hill in the fading light of dusk, you'll feel it, the wind that comes not from the earth, but from something deeper, the space between what was and what waits to be remembered. It may brush the skin of your arm, tangle softly in your hair. It may stir something in your chest, ancient and unnameable. That is how it speaks, not in words, but in longing, in that strange sense that you're being touched by something that remembers you, even though you were never there. And perhaps, as the wind moves across the stones tonight, it carries your breath too, a whisper of your being, a sigh of your soul. You are part of the memory now, part of the silence, part of the circle. Let the wind pass through you. Let it carry whatever you no longer need. Let it sing through your stillness. And when you sleep, sleep as the stones do, not in forgetting, but in knowing that the wind still speaks, and Göbekli Tepe still listens. History begins, they say, with the invention of writing. Before that, it is prehistory, the land of fragments, bones, guesswork, a long and silent waiting room for civilization. But that word prehistory has always felt hollow, as if the lives lived before ink were less real, less vivid, less worthy. And yet, here stands Göbekli Tepe, in the soft cradle of southeastern Turkey. Its stones older than any writing system, older than the wheel, older than the plow, older than the stories we've told ourselves about how we became who we are. How much older? Let's say it slowly, so the mind can catch up to the truth. Göbekli Tepe was built 7,000 years before the pyramids of Giza, more than 6,000 years before Stonehenge. It predates the Great Wall, the Colosseum, the Parthenon by a world. It existed before cities, before kingdoms, before the concept of borders, before the pharaohs learned to shape stone, before Gilgamesh became a myth, before Abraham walked the desert, before Shiva danced beneath the stars. Göbekli Tepe already stood. Its stones already faced inward. Its pillars already leaned into the night. Its foxes and vultures and serpents had already been carved by hands no one remembers. When the pyramids were just a dream in the heart of the Nile, Göbekli Tepe was already asleep beneath its blanket of earth. How does it feel to know that? To feel the floor of history slip beneath your feet and reveal an older ground? Because this changes everything. We once thought that humanity developed in a straight line, that we began with chaos, then order, that we hunted, then farmed, fought, then built, believed, then wrote it down. But Göbekli Tepe doesn't follow that story. It interrupts it. It rewrites it. It shows us that belief came first, that before we planted seeds in the earth, we planted myth in stone. Before we tamed animals, we carved them into memory. Before we gathered to trade, we gathered to remember. And maybe that's why Göbekli Tepe was built. Not to shelter, not to protect, but to connect, to call people together across the plains, beneath the stars, to sit in the circle of the sacred, and become something greater than survival. Because we weren't just hunting, we were yearning. We were aching for meaning, for ritual, for something to explain why the stars kept returning, and why people did not. The pyramids would one day be filled with treasures, mummified kings, and scriptures for the afterlife. But Göbekli Tepe had none of that. No rulers, no gold, no names, only space, only pillars, only silence. And yet, isn't that the purest offering? To build not for legacy, but for the sacred moment itself? Not to be remembered, but to participate in a mystery too vast to claim? Tonight, as you lie beneath your own ceiling, be it wood, plaster, or stars, imagine what it was to walk up that hill 12,000 years ago, to rise from the valley with others beside you, to follow the path carved only by memory, to approach the stone's circle not with fear, but with reverence, and to stand in a place that existed not after anything, but before everything, before temples, before thrones, before history could be written or rewritten, before even the pyramids dreamed. Let your breath slow now. Let your body become still, like the stone beneath the soil, and know that within you, there lives a memory older than civilization. You have not come from history. You have come from mystery, and mystery still remembers your name. They say that religion came after everything else. That once we had villages, once we had granaries and kings, once we'd organized life into lines and laws, then we built temples, then we invented gods. But Göbekli Tepe speaks another story. A story without words. A myth without myth makers. A story in which the temple came first. Even the word temple feels imprecise here. We use it because we have no better word. But Göbekli Tepe is not a place of sermons. Not a monument to doctrine or conquest. It is a space. A circle. A rhythm in stone. And that rhythm may have been the first heartbeat of civilization. Before farming, before hierarchy, before war and language and law, we gathered, not to build walls, but to open them, to carve, to align, to listen. We came together not for need, but for meaning. You see, the timeline we inherited tells us we learned to farm first, that the birth of agriculture gave rise to permanent settlements, that settlements gave rise to division of labor, that labor gave rise to surplus, that surplus gave rise to gods, to temples, to rituals, to dreams. Göbekli Tepe disrupts all of that because it was built before farming, before towns, before any known organized religion. And yet, it required extraordinary effort. Massive T-shaped pillars, weighing tons, carved from limestone and hauled from quarries without wheels or beasts of burden. Organized construction, shared symbols, long-term cooperation among dozens, perhaps hundreds of people. Why? Not for shelter, not for storage, not for power, but for something else, for a vision, a feeling, a sacred need. The very act of gathering may have birthed the impulse to stay, to settle, to plant, to build a new kind of life. Could it be that religion didn't arise from agriculture, but that agriculture arose from ritual? That before we tilled the land, we tilled the spirit? Some scholars believe Göbekli Tepe was the seed of society itself, that in coming together to worship, whatever that meant for them, people began to realize that they could live together, that meaning could unite what survival alone never could. And what were they worshiping? There were no idols, no pantheons, no divine faces watching from altars, only animals, only symbols, only pillars that stood like prayers in stone. Perhaps the temple wasn't built to serve the gods. Perhaps it was built to remember our place within something vast, to mark the turning of the stars, to honor the cycles of the wild, to gather not as masters of the earth, but as children of it. Imagine the first time firelight touched those pillars, the first time feet circled the center, the first time silence fell in that enclosure, and a human heart pounded in stillness, knowing it was part of something eternal. That is the myth that Göbekli Tepe offers. Not one carved by ego or empire, not a myth of conquest or dominion, but of reverence, of a time when the world was holy by default, when every wind carried a message, every animal a teacher, every stone a memory. It is the myth of the first temple, not because it was the first place we called sacred, but because it was the first place we allowed sacredness to shape us. So much of modern life is about building upward, skyward, faster, bigger, but the builders of Göbekli Tepe carved downward, into the earth, into stillness, into remembering, and maybe that is the invitation of this place. Not just to admire the past, but to reimagine the beginning. To ask, what if the first act of civilization was not war, or trade, or control, but wonder? What if the world began not with kings, but with circles? Not with rules, but with ritual? Not with conquest, but with awe. As you rest now, let that question move through you. Let it settle in your chest like an ember, and feel how ancient your longing is. Because the myth of the first temple isn't only about them. It's about you. About the quiet hunger for meaning that still lives in your bones. The desire not just to live, but to belong to something sacred. And tonight, in the hush of your breath, perhaps you do. There is a silence above Göbekli Tepe that is older than sound. It is not the silence of still air or empty space. It is the silence of the sky, a silence full of stars. Even now, in the stillness of night, when a modern world dims its lights and the old constellations begin to emerge, that same sky stretches above us, just as it did 12,000 years ago. And perhaps, just perhaps, they were watching it too. Not with telescopes or maps. Not with names like Orion or Taurus or Scorpio, but with eyes wide open, with breath held, with wonder so ancient it did not yet need explanation. You see, some believe Göbekli Tepe is more than ritual ground, more than temple, more than myth etched in stone. Some believe it is a mirror of the heavens, that the circles of pillars were laid out not just to hold meaning, but to reflect it, that each pillar, each carving, each orientation was part of a celestial map, a way to pull the sky downward and fix it into the body of the earth. This idea is not new. The great monuments of the ancient world often point upward. The pyramids of Egypt align with Orion's belt. Stonehenge greets the solstice sun. The temples of Angkor what reflect the movement of Venus. The Mayan observatories capture the passage of Jupiter and Mars. And perhaps, long before them all, Göbekli Tepe was the first to look upward and to say, "We see you. We remember." Some researchers have pointed to a particular pillar, Pillar 43 in Enclosure D. They call it the Vulture Stone. On it, we see a strange and haunting composition. A headless human figure, a vulture, a circle, possibly the sun or a celestial body. Scorpions, birds, foxes, not scattered randomly, not decoration, deliberate, symbolic, cosmic. Some suggest this is a star map, that it encodes constellations like Sagittarius or Scorpio, that it marks a celestial event, perhaps a comet, perhaps a solstice, perhaps something lost to time, but not to memory. A 2017 study even proposed that Göbekli Tepe records a great astronomical event. The fall of a comet around 10,950 BCE, which coincides with the beginning of the Younger Dryas. a sudden return to Ice Age conditions. Was this a memorial? A celestial obituary? A story told not in words, but in animals and stars? We cannot say for certain. But even if we set aside the theories and calculations, the feeling remains that these stones were watching, that they were aligned not just with one another, but with the sky itself. After all, to carve a circle is to echo the sun. To raise a pillar is to mimic the axis of the heavens. To place two stones facing each other is to mirror duality, sun and moon, night and day, life and death. They were not astronomers in the way we use the word now. They were listeners, observers, poets of the sky. They didn't chart or graph or label. They honored, because long before science and myth were torn apart, they were one thing. To look at the stars was not just to navigate. It was to remember your place, to realign your soul, to breathe with the rhythm of the cosmos. Perhaps Göbekli Tepe was a kind of tuning fork, vibrating in harmony with the stars. Perhaps ceremonies were held when Sirius rose again, when the moon hung full above the central circle, when the sun passed over the hill in golden silence. They may have believed the sky was alive, that it watched, that it spoke through light, through rhythm, through return. And so they carved its language into limestone, not to explain it, but to echo it, because some truths cannot be taught. They can only be felt, as when your chest swells at the sight of a summer night sky, or when you realize, suddenly, that you are made of the same particles as a distant star. So tonight, as your eyes grow heavy, and the constellations of your ceiling begin to blur, know that the stars you see now are the same ones that once watched over Göbekli Tepe. And perhaps, just perhaps, you carry their pattern within you too. You are not just beneath the cosmos. You are part of it. And your story, like theirs, is written in light. It waits, not in flight, not in motion, but carved into limestone, still, symmetrical, unblinking. An owl, etched with patience, as if it had always been there. You could pass it by. Many do. Among the serpents and foxes and scorpions, the owl is subtle. She does not leap from the pillar. She does not coil or strike or howl. She simply watches. Two round eyes, a crescent face, wings folded close to the body, silent and severe. And yet, there is something in that stillness that arrests the breath. The owl is the only bird that doesn't sing. She does not wake the morning. She does not herald spring. She belongs to night. She is the guardian of what is hidden, the keeper of dreams, the watcher at the edge of waking. At Göbekli Tepe, where stone holds memory and silence speaks like scripture, her presence is not decorative. It is ritual. Across the world, owls have always been more than birds. In ancient Greece, they were the companions of Athena, goddess of wisdom, of hidden knowledge. In Egypt, they were hieroglyphs for the unknown. In Native American stories, they heralded change. In Celtic myth, they flew between worlds, guiding souls in darkness. And here, at the oldest known ceremonial site on Earth, an owl perches quietly on stone, as if to say, I see what you do not. We do not know why she was carved. Was she a protector? A messenger? An omen? Was she meant to watch over the sacred circle? Or to watch us? Because here is the strange truth about eyes carved in stone. They do not blink. They do not look away. They do not forget. The owl at Göbekli Tepe stares into time. Not into the past, but into a space beyond it. She sees not what has been, but what has always been. The shape of silence, the rhythm of ritual, the pulse beneath the story. She is the one who remains when a fire goes out, when a circle empties, when the stars move behind clouds. Still she watches. Perhaps the builders knew that some presence must be left behind, some sentinel, some soul that never sleeps, not to guard the stone, but to guard the meaning, to keep it alive across the ages, until we return, brushing away the dust of centuries, looking up into the gaze of the owl and wondering, did she remember us? You see, this is not about what we see in the carvings. It is about what sees us, because in every sacred space, there is something that listens, that observes, and often it is not a god on a throne, but something quieter, closer, more ancient, a creature of the dark, a watcher, and perhaps that is what the owl represents. The part of ourselves that does not flinch, that does not rush, that knows how to sit in mystery and simply witness. You carry this watcher within you, the one who sees your life without judgment, the one who observes your dreams without fear, the one who sits in the dark and waits not for answers, but for truth. So tonight, as you drift into sleep, let your mind grow soft, let your thoughts settle like feathers, and in the quiet space between breaths, feel the eyes of the owl upon you, not as threat, but as blessing. You are not alone. You have never been, because even now, somewhere on that Anatolian hill, the owl still watches, and in her gaze, the memory remains unbroken. It's an easy word to reach for. Temple. It conjures grandeur. Sacrifice. The scent of incense curling into high ceilings. Statues of deities with eyes that do not blink. Altars. Priests. Hymns. Commands. But Göbekli Tepe is none of these. There are no thrones of stone. No sacred scripts. No idols looming over the people who came to kneel. There are no names. No images of gods. Not even the outline of a face. And yet, it feels holy, deeply, unmistakably. So the question becomes, how can there be a temple with no God? And the answer may be this. Perhaps what they worshipped was not a god at all. Perhaps they worshipped the act of worship itself. The reverence, the rhythm, the unspoken language of gathering under sky, of carving into stone what cannot be said aloud. Because long before dogma, before doctrine, there is simply awe. Awe of life, awe of death, awe of the cycle that binds them, awe of stars that return without fail, of animals that move with purpose through the wild, of winds that speak in tongues only the soul can understand. And perhaps that was enough, to come together, not to obey a divine figure, but to honor the mystery itself. What Göbekli Tepe gives us is presence without personification, sacredness without personality, a space that invites not belief in someone, but stillness in something. The stone pillars do not depict gods. They depict the world. Foxes, cranes, serpents, lions, boars, spiders, vultures. They represent the earth in its primal language, a sacred bestiary speaking of the order behind chaos. These were not gods to be feared. They were not jealous, not vengeful, not petitioned with offerings. They were symbols, archetypes, gateways. Perhaps the temple was not a house for the divine, but a mirror for the soul. To stand among the pillars, beneath the open sky, was to face yourself, your death, your smallness, your vastness. To be human is to be suspended between two silences, the one before we were born and the one after we leave. And maybe Göbekli Tepe was built in that space between, a space where silence became sacred and ritual became language. Imagine it, a circle of stones carved not to enclose, but to open, to draw the eye inward and the heart outward, twin pillars in the center, standing like opposites reconciled. Maybe they were male and female. Maybe they were body and soul. Maybe they were sky and earth. And in that narrow path between them, a person stepped forward, not to speak, but to listen. Because in this temple, there are no commandments, no voices from on high, only the murmur of wind, the weight of stone, the echo of your own breath as it slows to match the ancient rhythm of the world. It is easy to forget this kind of reverence. We rush, we speak, we fill every silence with sound. But here, it was only being, no punishment, no salvation, only presence, only the felt truth that we are not above nature, but part of it, not gods in waiting, but animals who can remember. And in remembering, we become sacred. So tonight, as the edges of the day begin to blur, and your thoughts soften into the shape of still water, know this: you don't need to believe in gods to feel the holy. You don't need a name for the divine to sit in wonder. You don't need a temple to be touched by the sacredness of simply existing. Because sometimes the greatest act of worship is to be quiet, to notice, to feel the pull of something beyond words, and allow it to move through you, like wind through stone, just as it moved through them on that hill so long ago, in a temple without gods, and yet full of God, however you define that word, or don't. They are everywhere, etched into stone with deliberate care. Foxes curled mid-step, boars charging, cranes in still flight, serpents coiled, ready, eternal. At Göbekli Tepe, the animals are not side notes. They are the language. No human faces, no kings, no written names. Only these creatures, again and again, watching us from the pillars like memories that never left. And so we must ask, were they just decorations, totems, clan symbols, or were they reflections? Because once upon a time, before we domesticated the dog, before we fenced the fields, before we tamed the wild, we were not separate from animals. We lived alongside them, feared them, followed them, learned from them. We watched how the birds migrated, how the foxes vanished and reappeared, how the wolves knew when to howl and when to disappear. And perhaps more than that, we saw ourselves in them. Perhaps the people who carved Göbekli Tepe didn't just revere the animals. Perhaps they recognized them, not as pets, not as prey, but as extensions of the human soul. The fox, clever, elusive, silent. The crane, graceful between earth and sky. The lion, power, pride, protectiveness. The scorpion, darkness, venom. The power to harm and the power to warn. The serpent, rebirth, transformation, the shedding of what no longer fits. These weren't just images. They were selves, facets, masks, archetypes carved in the language of limestone. Imagine standing in that sacred circle, looking into the eyes of a fox etched 1,000 lifetimes ago. You don't see a symbol. You see a part of yourself you have forgotten. The part that moves quietly, that knows how to survive, that can vanish when it must and return when it's safe. Now imagine the vulture. In most modern minds, a creature of death. But for the builders of Göbekli Tepe, perhaps a liberator. One who carries the soul upward. A companion of transition, not decay. We must remember, in some Neolithic traditions, the body of the dead was left exposed, returned not to the earth, but to the sky. And vultures, with their vast wings and clean bones, were not desecrators, but priests. The vulture reminds us, there is no waste in nature, only return. Each animal carved into these stones is more than a figure. It is a mirror, and mirrors do not just show beauty. They show truth, because the animals within us are not always noble. They are not always graceful. Some are fierce, some are afraid, some are hiding, some are hunting. And perhaps Göbekli Tepe was a place to face those parts, to honor them, to name them not with words, but with presence. There is no shame in the animal within, only memory, because before we learned to speak in language, we spoke in instinct. Before we sang, we howled. Before we built monuments, we listened to the trees. And somewhere in us, beneath the clothes, beneath the titles, beneath the lights and rules and rushing noise of modern life, those animal selves still live. You have a fox inside you, and a bird, and a serpent coiled around a part of your story you've yet to shed. To walk among the pillars of Göbekli Tepe was perhaps to walk among your own soul, split into animal form, honored, seen, accepted, not punished, not corrected, but carved into stone and made sacred. And that is the gift of this place. It does not demand that we be pure. It does not ask that we ascend. It invites us to remember the body, the breath, the hunger, the fear, the cycle, to remember that beneath everything, we are still of the earth, still part of that great, breathing, watchful world of fur, claw, feather, fawn, still animals, still divine. So as you rest now, let go of the polished skin of self. Let your breath slow into the rhythm of the forest. Let your heartbeat find the pace of the wild. And somewhere in the night, between sleep and silence, you may feel the fox stir. And when you do, don't be afraid. It is only the part of you that was never lost. Only the animal coming home. They did not sign their work. No initials at the base of a pillar. No mark etched into the stone saying, I was here. No boast. No name. No monument to the self. The builders of Göbekli Tepe vanished into silence. And in that silence, they left behind something eternal. Who were they? What do they call themselves? Do they call themselves anything at all? There is no trace of kings, no chieftains, no divine rulers carved into the rock, no figures lifted above others, only the same symbols, the same stone, the same stillness. Who carved these enormous monoliths? Who coordinated the quarrying, the transporting, the shaping, the placement? We do not know, and perhaps that is the point. In a world where we chase recognition, where monuments are often built not to honor the sacred, but to secure legacy, Göbekli Tepe stands as a testament to anonymity. They created something immense, mysterious, lasting, and they asked for nothing in return, not even to be remembered. Their reward was the ritual itself, the moment of gathering, the shared breath in the circle, the firelight dancing on the freshly carved boar, the wind passing through the open enclosure, whispering across their faces, and then moving on. That was enough. And somehow, that humility feels more powerful than all the golden tombs ever sealed, more sacred than any name chiseled into marble. Because what lives in silence does not die. The silence of the builders is not emptiness. It is presence without identity. It is love for the sacred without needing ownership. It is creation for its own sake. We have no myths about them, no origin story, no hero's tale, no epic passed down, only stone, only carvings, only circles, and maybe, just maybe, that is the purest myth of all. To live as part of the earth, not above it. To build without the need to be seen. To shape beauty with your hands, and then let it go. We tend to measure the greatness of a civilization by what it left behind. Palaces, laws, poetry, war. But what if greatness lies instead in what was offered and then released? Göbekli Tepe was buried not by time, but by choice. Those who built it sealed it with their own hands. Not in fear, not in failure, but in some kind of sacred final act. And then they walked away. They did not demand to be known. They trusted the earth to hold the memory. They trusted the wind, the sky, the stars, and perhaps one day us. What would it mean to live like that? To create something not for credit, but for connection? To contribute not for legacy, but for the shared breath of now? To love the sacred so deeply that your own name becomes irrelevant? These are the questions the builders left behind. Not in books, not in sermons, but in silence, and it is up to us to hear them. So tonight, as you rest, as the world outside softens and recedes, imagine their hands, rough, calloused, lifting stone, drawing foxes in curved lines with tools made of bone and flint, wiping sweat from their faces under stars we still see, and then letting go, letting it belong not to them, but to time, to meaning, to memory, to you, because you are here now, listening, remembering, falling asleep in the story they never told. And somehow, that was always enough. Before we had books, we had bodies. Before we had dates and dynasties, we had dreams. Before history, as we understand it, began, there was memory, not written, but carved, not stored in libraries, but kept in stone, in ritual, in rhythm, in circles. Göbekli Tepe does not belong to history. It belongs to something older, to a time when memory was passed through the hands, not the pen, when knowledge lived in movement, in firelight, in breath, a time when the earth itself was our first storyteller, when we did not need to be told what was sacred, because the wind already whispered it, and the sky repeated it, and our own hearts echoed it back. We have long believed that history is what begins with writing, with symbols etched into clay tablets, with chronicles of kings and floods and wars. But that belief is a narrow one. It favors the conqueror, the architect, the scribe. It forgets the hands that built without being named. It forgets the storytellers with no language but silence. The builders of Göbekli Tepe had no alphabet, no scrolls, no sacred texts, and yet they remembered. They remembered the animals, the turning of stars, the feel of the moon rising, the grief of death, the awe of existence, and they poured that remembering into stone, into circles deep in the earth, into carvings that still hold meaning, even when we do not know the exact words. This is not ignorance. It is intimacy. Because memory before history is not about information. It is about relationship, the kind of knowing that doesn't need explanation, that does not dissect or analyze, but honors, the kind of memory that lives in ritual, in repetition, in the smell of smoke, in the hush before a chant begins. Can you feel it? That ancient recognition? That strange stirring in your chest? When you see the outline of a fox carved 12,000 years ago, and somehow, you know what it means? Not with your mind, but with something older, something that still dreams in circles, that still understands what the stones are saying, even if the voice is faint now, like a drumbeat heard through water. That is memory before history. It is the memory of presence, not plot. The memory of how it feels to look at the stars and know they're watching back. The memory of how it feels to be small and sacred. At the same time, Göbekli Tepe does not teach us facts. It offers us an invitation. Remember what you forgot when you learned to write. Remember that the ground holds stories, that the wind carries names, that silence is not empty. It is filled with things too holy for words. And maybe that's what the builders wanted. Not to preserve an account, but to preserve a feeling. A memory not of what happened, but of what it meant. And what it means still. Because this place was not just for them. It was for all who would come after. For all who would sit in the dark and wonder. For all who would stand in the circle and feel the pull of something deeper than history. You, now, here. So, as your breath begins to slow, as your body curls deeper into the soft dark of night, let the layers of your modern mind peel away. Let the words fall silent. Let the clock grow irrelevant. Let the pages of history close. And listen, there, beneath it all, something waits. Not forgotten, not gone, just waiting for you to remember. You have always known, and you still do, even now, especially now. Not all losses come in fire. Not all disappearances are violent. Some vanishings happen slowly, softly, like sand slipping through fingers you forgot were open. This is how we lost the old ways. Not all at once, but piece by piece, layer by layer, until the stories grew too faint to hear, and the carvings lay hidden beneath dust that no one asked to brush away. We did not forget because we were foolish. We forgot because we moved, because we chased the next thing, the stronger tool, the sharper weapon, the safer house. We traded the circle for the square, the open air for walls, the firelight for script, the ritual for routine. And slowly, we lost the language of reverence. We began to separate from the land, from the animals, from the breath that once tied us to the stars. We forgot how to move together in ceremony. We forgot how to listen to the silence between the stones. We forgot that the world was not made for us, but with us. We called it progress. We built cities that touched the clouds, but no longer knelt to touch the earth. We named gods with voices that punished, rather than the kind that whispered through wind and fox and moon. We replaced the mystery of ritual with the precision of measurement. And slowly, we forgot how to feel sacred in the presence of nothing at all. Göbekli Tepe became covered, not just with soil, but with time, with forgetting. The builders did not return. Their stories were not passed down. Their rituals faded from the breath of memory. And the hill that once echoed with quiet awe fell into sleep. But here's the thing about memory. It does not disappear. It sinks. It buries itself in the root system of being. It waits beneath the surface of the modern mind, curled like a seed, waiting for rain. And sometimes, when the world grows quiet again, it begins to stir. That's what Klaus Schmidt found in 1994. Not just stones, but the slow stirring of remembrance. The breath of a myth that had waited 12,000 years for someone to come listening. Because forgetting is not failure. It is part of the cycle. The seed forgets the sun in the darkness of soil, only to remember it again as root turns to stem. Perhaps we needed to forget. Perhaps we had to leave the circle to learn how much we needed it. Perhaps forgetting was never the end, but the way back. You see, we are not broken. We are simply asleep. In places like Göbekli Tepe, they are dreams sent by the earth to wake us up. Not with noise, not with answers, but with the deepest kind of question. Do you remember how to be sacred? Not how to perform, not how to obey, but how to move with reverence, how to listen with your bones, how to breathe in a way that honors breath itself. The great forgetting was not a failure of memory. It was the moment before remembering, the hush before the song returns. And now, here you are, lying in the stillness of night. The noise is quieted. The day has released its grip, and there's only breath and darkness and a faint outline of circle, traced by stars you forgot were above you. Can you feel it? Something waking beneath your ribs. Something that was never truly lost. Because the circle still turns. The wind still moves. The fox still watches. And the stones are still speaking. You're not here by accident. You are part of the remembering. And the great forgetting, however long it lasted, is ending now. With you. Here. Now. Not all voices are made of sound. Some live in shadow. In the space between what is seen and what is felt. In the soft tension between knowing and mystery. The stones of Göbekli Tepe do not shout. They do not command. They do not explain themselves. They whisper, and only those who approach with stillness, with reverence, with the quiet listening of a soul that remembers its own beginning. Only they will hear what the stones are saying. What do they whisper? Not words, but feelings. Not stories, but songs. Low, rhythmic, like heartbeat through earth. They say, before there were names, there was meaning. Before there were gods, there was gratitude. Before there was language, there was wonder. They do not tell us what happened here. They ask instead, can you feel what happened here? Can you let it echo in your bones? Can you remember without needing to know? Because truth does not always arrive as data. Sometimes it arrives as presence. The stones are not trying to be understood. They are asking to be witnessed. Their carvings are not puzzles to be solved, but feelings to be opened. Each animal, each shape, each spiral is a note in a song the earth once sang to itself. A love song, a grief song, a ritual of return. And maybe the reason the builders left no text, no codex, no doctrine, is because they knew that truth is too sacred to be captured. It must be encountered, felt, lived. And so they gave us these shapes. Foxes and vultures, lions and serpents, not to explain life, but to mirror it. And still, they whisper. They whisper to the wind, which carries their voice, to the moonlight, which strokes their surface, to the starlight, which remembers the moment each stone was placed. And now, they whisper to you, not because you are special, not because you were chosen, but because you are willing to listen. You have slowed down enough, grown still enough, to hear the voice behind the silence. And what does it say? It says, you are part of us. You are not separate from the sacred. You do not need permission to feel reverence. It has always belonged to you. The stones whisper that holiness is not housed in temples or scrolls, but in moments, in gestures, in circles drawn in dust, in the way your breath meets the night and doesn't ask for anything more. They whisper that time is not a straight line, is a spiral, a return, a remembering. They whisper that even in forgetting, you were held, that even in exile from wonder, the path home was waiting, under your feet, beneath your skin, inside your breath. And now you are here, not in Göbekli Tepe, but in yourself, in the quiet circle of this listening, in the sacred space where story is born not from fact, but from feeling. You have walked through history and arrived in memory, and the stones are still whispering. Build without fear, live with reverence. Let yourself be the temple. Let the sacred be ordinary again. So sleep now, with their voices in your breath. Let the carvings dream through your body. Let the fox curl near your chest. Let the vulture open her wings above you. Let the twin pillars rise within you, tall and silent and sure. You are not separate. You never were. The stones are speaking, and you are remembering how to listen. Close your eyes. No, not just from the world, but from the noise inside it. Let the light of thought grow dim, soft as ash. Let the breath become rhythm, not effort. Now, imagine a hill, not in Anatolia, not on a map, but behind your ribs, beneath your heartbeat, deep in that quiet place where no language has ever reached. There, waiting patiently, is a circle. No one built it with tools. No stone was hauled, and yet it is older than your name. It has been with you since your first breath. Before fear, before ambition, before explanation, is the sacred center. It mirrors the circles at Göbekli Tepe, not in shape, but in function. Because just as they gathered in those rings of stone to touch something greater, so too have you been circling the center of yourself, even in your forgetting. And like Göbekli Tepe, your inner temple is buried, not lost, not broken, just resting under layers of noise, of story, of should and should not, of time. But if you sit still long enough, if you close the gates of sight and sound and certainty, you begin to feel it again. The circle, the presence, the inner enclosure that was never meant for words. It does not contain doctrine. It does not require permission. It is built not of belief, but of being, and it waits, like the temple, like the stones, like the sky, not impatient, not forgotten, just there, somewhere along the way, We stopped tending that place. We filled it with other voices. We paved over the soil of our stillness with noise, with performance, with striving, and the circle grew quiet. But it never left, because it isn't something to be earned. It is something to be remembered. What would it feel like to return to it? To enter the sacred circle within, not through effort, but through surrender? What would it mean to walk the inner circumference of your own silence, as gently as a barefoot pilgrim, as reverently as if stepping into the oldest temple in the world? You don't need chants, or fire, or ancient stone. You need breath. You need stillness. You need to sit in the center of your own soul and say, I am here. I remember. I don't need to know to belong. Because the most ancient rituals were never about control. They were about returning. They were not about answers. They were about presence. Göbekli Tepe was not a place of declaration. It was a place of convergence. And so is the circle within you. A convergence of all you've been, all you've forgotten, all you've yet to become. You do not need to build it. Only uncover it. You do not need to carve it. Only listen. You do not need to explain it. Only sit. Let it hold you now. This temple of breath. This sacred center that never asked for praise. Only awareness. You're not outside it. You are it. The circle is you. And the you that knows this is more ancient than time. So sleep now. Not into forgetting, but into remembering. Sleep as one who is held. As one who belongs. As one who has come home to a circle that was always waiting just beneath the surface of self. Before the breath was measured, before it was broken into carbon and oxygen, before it was labeled as a function of lungs and survival, it was something else. It was spirit. It was voice. It was messenger. It was life moving invisibly. There was a time, older than language, older than kings, when the people looked up at the sky, felt the cool current of air sweep over their skin, and did not say, "This is wind." They said, "Something is passing through me. Something unseen, but not unknown." It's easy now to forget, to walk through a breeze and think nothing of it, to shut the windows and quiet the drafts, to forget that, for most of our ancestors, wind was not inconvenience. It was presence. And nowhere does this become more intimate than at Göbekli Tepe, because there, on the high hill above the Mesopotamian plain, the wind never stops. It weaves through the T-shaped pillars. It hums against the carvings. It curls inside the circles, as if searching for voices that once rose in prayer. There are no roofs at Göbekli Tepe. There never were. The temple was made open, deliberately, devotionally, to the sky, to the stars, to the breath of the world itself. The wind was part of the ritual. It was not a backdrop, but a participant. When the people stood in silence beneath the moon, when they gathered inside the enclosures, their skin felt the cold kiss of the northern breeze. Their hair moved with it. Their fire danced because of it. Their offerings, their chants, whatever they may have been, rose into it. And then the wind carried them into the sky, into the next valley, into the stars, because to them, the wind was not emptiness. It was the breath of something vast. In Sumerian myth, the god Enlil was the wind itself, a force that shaped worlds and destinies. In Hebrew, the word ruach means both wind and spirit. In Sanskrit, pra is the life force that moves with breath. In Greek, pneuma is both soul and air. All across ancient thought, breath and spirit were one. To inhale was to receive the sacred. To exhale was to give it back. And perhaps on that sacred hill, the people stood in circles not just to face each other, but to breathe together, to let the wind pass through them, connecting body to body and self to sky. Imagine it. You stand in the center of the stone ring, your bare feet planted in the dust of the ancestors, your chest rising and falling. Your eyes closed not in fear, but in listening. And then a current of wind moves through the circle. Soft, sure, unseen. It lifts your hair. It brushes your skin. It enters your body and leaves again, carrying something with it. Something unspoken. A grief, a hope, a memory that was never yours, but somehow lives inside you. This was the wind before it was weather. This was the spirit that moved through the circle of stone, through the throat of the fox, through the wing of the vulture. It did not need form. It was the force that gave form meaning. Even now, as you lie still in the quiet of night, the wind comes. It touches the trees outside. It brushes the window. It moves across rooftops and finds your breath and says, softly without words, I am here. I always have been. You are not alone, because the wind is still spirit. It still carries presence, and it still knows how to move through the ancient temple within you. So as you breathe in, welcome it, and as you breathe out, release what no longer needs to be held. Let the wind be prayer again. Let it carry you back, not to a place on a map, but to a truth in your bones. That what moves through you is not empty. It is alive. It is connected. It is sacred. The same wind that once passed through Göbekli passes through you now, and it whispers not with noise, but with knowing. Sleep now in that wind's embrace. Sleep as the temple did, not in silence, but in sacred breath. A circle does not end. It curves back into itself, folds into its own breath, and arrives where it began, not as a repetition, but as a return. So here we are. We've walked through the stones. We've breathed with the wind. We've knelt before the silent foxes and felt the owl's gaze rest on our skin. And now the path curves inward, not forward, not backward, but inward, because the place we were always walking toward was not Göbekli. It was here, this stillness, this breath, this quiet moment where all things rest before they begin again. Göbekli was never a destination. It was a mirror, not of the past, but of what never left. The circle is not sacred because it is old. It is sacred because it remembers how to return. And so must we. We who left the wild behind. We who paved over the sacred. We who forgot how to move slowly, how to breathe with the earth instead of above it. We who turned ritual into routine and wonder into explanation. We are the ones who must return, not by rebuilding temples of stone, but by uncovering the ones that were never buried, the ones in our breath, in our silence, in our awe. Because here is what the circle teaches. Nothing is truly lost. It only sleeps, and one day it will wake. The builders of Göbekli knew this. That's why they buried their temple not in destruction, but in ceremony. They placed the sacred back into the earth, like a seed, like a vow. And now, 12,000 years later, that seed blooms again, not as stone, but as remembrance. You are part of that bloom, by listening, by breathing, by letting this story pass through you, like wind through leaves. You have walked the full arc of the circle, and now you are where you began, still, present, sacred. So what happens now? Do you leave the circle, or do you carry it with you? Do you let the fox walk beside you, invisible but never gone? Do you feel the twin pillars rise within you when you speak truth? Do you honor the wind, not just as air, but as the spirit that remembers who you were? Before the forgetting, this is not the end. It is the closing of the first spiral, the breath between the in-breath and the next. It is the sacred pause, and in that pause, something deep and ancient says, you were never lost. You only left to find your way back. The temple is not behind you. It is becoming you. So sleep now, not as a forgetting, but as a descent into the quiet heart of the circle, where memory and myth are the same, where the stones still speak, where the wind still prays, where the sacred waits patiently to rise again in your next breath. The wind has calmed. The fire has faded to embers. The circle is quiet now. The carvings no longer call for questions. They simply are, and we, who have walked through 26 nights of wonder, arrive not at the end, but at the mirror, because here at last comes the truth beneath all truths. We were never just listening to the story. We were the story all along. The stones were not left for scholars. The animals were not symbols for study. The enclosures were not puzzles to be solved. They were reflections of you, of me, of all of us before we forgot how to see ourselves in sacredness. We thought we were visitors to Göbekli, but in truth, we were walking home to something we've always known, but didn't have words for. That memory is not held in books, but in the breath between breaths. That ritual lives not in history, but in the way you hold silence like a bowl. That the divine is not far, not foreign, not above us, but within every footstep made with presence. Yes, the foxes were there, and the owls, and the vultures and serpents and boars. But so were we, not as tourists from the future, but as pieces of a spiral that has never stopped turning. We are not descendants of those who built the sacred. We are continuations of them. The same hunger, the same longing, the same awe when we look up at stars and feel the pull of something greater. You see, Göbekli was never just a temple. It was a gesture that says, to be human is to wonder. To be human is to gather. To be human is to remember the sacred without needing to name it. And that gesture is still alive. In you, when you pause before speaking, when you look at the sky and go quiet, when you touch the earth and feel something stir in your chest. That is the story told by stones, by wind, by stars, and now by you, because sacredness was never meant to be contained in walls. It was always meant to be lived, not with perfect knowledge, not with certainty, but with presence. The kind of presence that once built circles in dust and watched the sun fall across carved foxes as if the light itself were remembering. And now here you are, full circle, not at the edge, but at the heart of the story, the myth that had no ending, because you were still walking it. So sleep now, not as forgetting, but as a final descent into the still place where story and soul merge. Let the circle hold you. Let the stones watch over you. Let the wind sing through you. You are not a visitor to the sacred. You are not even the seeker. You are the song the stones have been singing. You are the answer the wind still carries. You are the memory that never left. And this story, this long, slow remembering, carved in breath and shadow and dream, has always been about you.